Hello and welcome to another Warcraft 3 audio commentary. This is ScryMind, and this is going to be a 4 versus 4 game on Murgle Oasis. This is patch 1.29. I believe they made some slight changes to this map, but that's not really going to be the focus here. I don't think the changes are all that big anyway. But yeah, this is going to be a replay about Panda time, as I like to call it. But basically, it's where I convince my allies to go for a panda as their first hero in order to, generally I usually suggest this when there's multiple human enemies, and I don't remember how many humans were on the other team, sort of, that chose human from the score screen, but yeah, I'll look it up really quick just to see. But yeah, actually there was only one human opponent and one undead opponent, and then there was 2 randoms. It turns out the 2 randoms were both human though, so that's pretty good. But anyway, I find the teal player, who is actually the one who picked human as their race, and he's on the edge, so that's very useful as base. I don't see a tower going up, or I didn't when I scouted, so that's good news. And my allies agree to do it. The panda, I think the panda is actually also fairly decent against undead, at least in tier 1 and 2. Against like destroyers or abominations or frostworms, the panda isn't quite as effective because you need to hit a bunch of targets, of course, with Drunken Haze and or Breath of Fire, preferably both. Destroyers being magic immune, you can't hit any of those. And then the higher food units, you know, having fewer of them means you're going to probably be hitting less targets. That's just the way it goes. But either way, I convinced my allies to rush teal. Green has gone for an Archmage, and he's going to sort of start harassing teal. I don't know if this really helps us, him showing up a little bit early. He does get a bunch of damage on his footman, which is potentially fairly useful. But on the flip side, it sort of alerts his allies that, hey, maybe we need to go help defend teal. It's just one player though, so maybe not so much. I don't see anybody moving towards helping him just yet. But of course, when these 3 pandas show up, which again, 3 is probably the ideal number. You know, if you don't really need 4 to really do all this damage. 3 can really get the job done, and as far as killing the workers, which is the goal of this strategy. Also, Green knocked out the tower, so that was fairly important for him to do. And then, as you can see, just look how many peasants we've already killed and we're about to kill. There's, you know, he's only got 2, 3. Once we kill these 2 peasants, if we do kill them, there will be 3. And then Green's going for this other peasant. Okay, so now he's down to 3. He's down to 2 now. 2 militia. It looks like Pink is town portaled in, so already they've used a town portal. They do kill Yellow's hero, but again, the alternative is, especially for an undead player, to try to save his hero. They're going to kill a fiend as well, so that's somewhat painful to lose the fiend. Green probably lost a footman or 2 or something, I don't know. Orange ends up town portaling, I think that's Orange, but he's elf, so he has some moon wealth that he can sort of heal up at. Unfortunately for Orange though, he's blocked off his base completely, so he's going to have to uproot this Ancient of War to get his hero out. That's not exactly great. I mean, I guess, you know, defending your wisps and stuff is pretty good, but if you're going to wall your base off as elf, you really need to have like an Ancient of War or an Ancient of Wonders in there, in part of the wall, so you can uproot it, so you don't get sort of in situations like this. But regardless though, this map has a mana fountain in the center, so we can sort of go there and regenerate our mana if we need to. That's what I did. And my next target is going to be blue. I saw that he had a rifleman build, a somewhat open looking base when I scouted him. Now it looks like he's sort of closing it off, but I can get to his peasants still, and he doesn't have a tower even sort of upgrading yet. So So that's, you know, it looks like he's going to be fairly vulnerable to this push. Now, rifles will be fairly effective against these huntresses if and when they show up. So I get off one breath of fire. I pull back. I don't, you know, want to get surrounded and everything. I'd rather keep my town portal if at all possible. Though if I can trade my town portal for something like, you know, 5 or 6 peasants, that's I'll sort of take that as a pretty good trade. Of course, I really don't want to lose any huntresses, though a Mountain King and rifles is about the best, one of the best things really he can have in this scenario in terms of securing kills, because with Stormbolt he can stun the Huntress, focus fire with the piercing damage rifles, and as he's stunned from Stormbolt, I can't Shadow Meld. So I'll end up losing 2 Huntresses. I think I'm going to save this one with Shadow Meld just barely, but I lost 2 Huntresses. I don't know exactly how many peasants I killed. In terms of, you know, cost comparison, a Huntress is about 195 gold, so it would take almost 3 peasants worth per Huntress. So if I killed 6 peasants, that would sort of offset the cost. I mean, it's not quite 3, so it would offset the cost. Now, I did use a town portal as well, though, so you'd have to sort of account for that, and probably another 2 or 3 peasants. But we're really sort of messing up their economy. He's got to rebuild them. And Red's got a Crypt Lord, some ghouls, a fiend. He didn't return all the lumber with those workers, so that's pretty good. So you can see that Teal is still tier 1 now. So that's, you know, that's really one of the big impacts of this strategy if it's successful. Not only do you get a bunch of experience, and you know, you sort of can see what the enemies are doing. If, you know, they don't react sort of well enough, they can just lose the game right off the bat in the early part of the game. But even if they do sort of respond in a sort of somewhat competent way, they're still probably going to lose a bunch of workers, and you know, that player's tech is going to be severely delayed, which is, again, pretty good when you're talking about human. A lot of the strong human sort of strategies and units and things are tier 2 and tier 3. You know, having access to casters, griffins, knights, potentially tanks, upgraded mortars, these type of things. Even flying machines can be fairly dangerous in mass sometimes. So yeah, I think it's a good strategy. I think it worked out pretty well here. Now, since then, the game's sort of been going back and forth. We've had some engagements. It looks like, you know, the Allies maybe lost some stuff. Yellow picks up an Alchemist. Orange picks up a Pit Lord. I think actually the Alchemist and the Pit Lord are pretty decent units or heroes in 4s. I think they scale fairly well in terms of with tech units and with large army sizes, both in terms of your army and the enemy's army. When you're talking about the Pit Lord, if you can obviously hit more units with Howl of Terror, if that's what you've got, that's good. I think he went for Rain of Fire, probably. It sort of goes along with the sort of AoE damage theme, but I sort of prefer Howl of Terror. But again, it's sort of, Rain of Fire is arguably more of a proactive sort of burst damage spell. So it really depends on the situation which one is arguably better. I think Howl of Terror, of course, has the higher sort of ceiling in terms of impact and power level, but you cannot secure any kills just with Howl of Terror. So with Rain of Fire, you could. But anyway, me and Green are going to run in here and harass Teal. He's got a bunch of towers. All of them are arcane. All the ones that are finished are arcane towers. He's throwing up 2 guard towers now, but Red Town Portal's in. He's going to be an ideal target for Drunken Haze Breath of Fire. You notice a bunch of ghouls, a bunch of fiends, plenty of units to hit. And again, that's one of the reasons why the Panda is pretty strong against undead. They don't have any any magic immune or magic resistant units until tier 3, where they get destroyers. So yeah, some of these fiends, I guess, were illusions, so that was interesting. But I did notice that, I think. But anyway, we've got blue town portaling in to defend, and he's got a bunch of rifles, which again against Druids of the Talon, Dryads, and Hunts, pretty effective. But we did our damage there. In the meantime, yellow is going into pink's main, so we're sort of doing a split-pronged attack. Pink doesn't look like, even from inside of his main, that he can hold off yellow. I don't know where pink's hero is, if it's dead. I guess he lost his hero. He had a panda as well, so that's funny. Lots of pandas in this game, but oh, close. Oranges in a little bit of danger from that Mountain King. Luckily, the Mountain King didn't use the Clarity Potion and didn't have enough mana to Storm Bolt there, so that was good. Orange ends up Town Portal, or staffing back to his base. Pretty smart decision. Really important not to sort of needlessly lose level 3 heroes, and obviously having mana and hit points is very important. But anyway, we decide to go join yellow. He looks like he's having a decent amount of success at pink's main. Pink is only level 1. I don't know if that's if the panda was his first hero. Oh no, the Mountain King was his first hero, so that's he's level 3. But luckily he doesn't have any mana, or he's only got 30 mana, so he can't cast any spells. So he's not really a threat here, and he's really risking, losing this hero. And he should definitely lose it with these dryads and things. So we kill a level 3 panda. Looks like we're gonna get that rifle kill. And red town portals. So we're forcing them to keep town portaling. Again, I didn't use a town portal running, through the center of the map. So I don't have one. So it's, I don't think I used one there. But yeah, and I pick up a Naga for Forked Lightning. Frost Arrow is also pretty good, so that's something to think about. But again, I was sort of going with the AOE damage. If you can hit early and often, and keep it, keep the units, tier 1, or if they're getting like mortars and things, as long as they're not getting like magic immune units, mass spellbreakers, mass destroyers, pandas are going to be pretty good. And in terms of getting up to mass spellbreakers and destroyers, that takes a little bit of time. So while that would actually probably be really ideal, both against dots, against archers, against I don't know about against dryads, but against all of our heroes and these chimera, spellbreakers would be amazing, and destroyers would be fairly decent as well. So that probably should have been what they shot for, but it's pretty hard to do that as well as sort of hold the early and mid game, because spellbreakers are not very ideal against huntresses. They're only okay against like rifles and archers. They're pretty good against archers, I should say, but against rifles they're not amazing. Like against fiends and stuff, they're not amazing. Again, against chimeras, they're magic immune, so that's really good, but they don't hit air units. So by themselves, they're not really a counter, and they don't. Certain counters to chimeras, like really the best counters just to pure chimeras, are like gargoyles or dragon hawks or any air unit, because chimeras don't hit air themselves. So any air unit really is going to be a good counter to chimeras, destroyers, for example. So frostworms, any of those things, griffins, any of those things are going to be in good shape against chimeras. So they can't just mass spellbreakers and chimera. Now if they added fiends, of course, that web can sort of bring the spellbreakers into it, and the chimeras with the web. Fiends are very good against a lot of like gargs and hippogriffs, and even hippogriff riders. Wind riders they're okay against. But yeah, trying to sort of coordinate that and get the right units, it can be fairly difficult. And but in the early game you don't really have those options. You can only make things that are going to be vulnerable to a panda in terms of units. Footmen, ghouls, fiends. Archers are somewhat, they have a Loon's Grace, but they have really low hit points, so they're, while you might think, well, Loon's Grace is really good against magic, but their hit points are low to sort of compensate for that. So and then huntresses, glaive throwers, even grunts are probably about the best thing in terms of fighting off pandas, because they're they have a lot of hit points, they do normal damage, and so you're not, it takes so many like Breath of Fires to actually, you really need like a level 3 panda to be sort of really level 2 or 3 at least to be really effective against grunts. Um, so and of course with normal damage they do better against heroes, but yeah, in terms of defending the strategy, a key thing is just to get like 1 or 2 arcane towers. But it's a pretty rare, like you don't really often see players do this. I try to get people to do this on my team all the time when I see that there's going to be some humans against us. It works okay against undead, I guess, and um, if you can level up, it's not terrible against orc either because their sort of magic resistant unit is a spellbreaker, which isn't. I mean, they have AOE disenchant, which is okay against drunken haze, but other than that, everything else they've got is going to be fairly vulnerable to the AOE panda abilities. Mass raiders, mass headhunters or berserkers, mass casters for sure, bat riders, uh, demolishers, anything but basically taurens and spellbreakers in physical form. In ethereal form, spellbreakers or not spellbreakers, sorry, spirit walkers in ethereal form are going to be fairly vulnerable to the panda. But anyway, other than that though, the other part about the panda is they hit buildings as well. Their AOE hits air units, ground units, heroes, and buildings. Breath of Fire does. So, when you're talking about, what you can do with a panda, you can harass bases with multiple pandas. You can harass bases with towers. You can harass, bases without towers. Mass air unit armies, the panda is decent. Mass ground units, anything that's not magic immune, really, the panda is fairly good against. Mechanical units. So if we look at the score screen here, you can see that kills, it was like me, blue, orange, yellow actually. Yellow was like the top with 43. I think yellow was undead if I remember correctly. So, but yeah, he got 43 unit kills. Hero kills, he got 2, so he pretty much topped the chart here in terms of the kills. We'll see if he killed a lot of buildings. He killed 4 buildings, so he pretty much won in every single category in terms of unit kills, which is pretty good. Again, the Alchemist actually has pretty good synergy with Undead because of the armor reduction is good for killing units and heroes. It doesn't do anything against buildings, of course, but yeah, in terms of getting unit kills, and again with Orb of Corruption, if you add that into it, is going to give you some significant armor reduction, which really works well with Focus Fire. So adding the Alchemist and or the Orb of Corruption with it will help you Focus Fire single targets, and you also will still have AoE with Acid Bomb for the Alchemist. So you're not, it's not like the Alchemist doesn't add anything for AoE, and Acid Bomb is not quite technically burst damage. Like, it's got poison damage and armor reduction. So the poison damage takes a little bit of time to sort of happen, and then the armor reduction only matters if you're actually hitting the target, so that takes a little bit of time as well. But it's sort of all focused on damage, and then the Alchemist does, with Chemical Rage, he's got pretty good base. He's got one of the highest base damages in the game. Now, his attack speed until you get Chemical Rage isn't all that impressive to compensate for that. But once you do get Chemical Rage, his DPS, his base DPS, sort of with that in mind, is one of the highest in the game. So, that's pretty good. He's got a lot of hit points. Really, his big downside is his low armor value. He doesn't have high armor, so in terms of taking damage from getting attacked, you've got that. And the other side of it is with Undead. I guess now they've buffed Healing Spray to not heal enemy stuff. or creeps, it's much more effective. So it gives undead an option besides just statues and death coil and sacrificial skulls for blight. It gives you those, I guess, cannibalized. I guess undead had some options in terms of healing, but they were all sort of clunky, and it's not quite as good as like a heal salve or anything. It's really like death coil or wait until you get statues, basically. Um, unless you're going ghouls, and then I guess you could say cannibalized. But anyway, all that stuff aside, the alchemist, sort of showing out there, and then you know, nobody really killed a ton of buildings. It was mostly army on army combat, with a couple of tower kills here and there. And then so yeah, and then in terms of resources, I was actually up. I was at the top, it seems, which is interesting. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think nobody expanded there. I don't think the expansions on that map are pretty difficult to creep, actually. But yeah, it was like me, yellow, and orange, and then everybody else was a little bit below. And teal was, again, really you saw the impact of us hammering teal's economy. He was like a good 1,200 gold behind the leaders. Even the next lowest person, he was 700, about 700 gold behind, so 690, something like that. So, yeah, so that that's pretty much how it goes. With the strategy, again, it was very effective in this game. The only way it could have been slightly more effective is if we didn't lose like a fiend. If we didn't lose, I don't remember if 2 players lost their heroes. I know 1 player did lose their hero, another player town portaled. So not losing the town portal, not losing the fiend, and I don't know if a player lost footman or whatever, but that's about the only way it could have been more productive, and that's not like kills. That's just avoiding losses from us. So we really got the kills in that we needed. Or that sort of made it effective. Again, I don't know, added up all the gold cost of a fiend and a hero and a town portal and whatever. I didn't like do that math to figure it out, but again, when you knock the opponent down to like 1 worker from I don't know how many he had, maybe 12 or 13 or something, I don't know, but that's a lot of lost sort of harvesting time for gold, for lumber. And again, in terms of the tech, we can look here and see the tech percentage. 0 tech percentage from teal. I don't know how often you see that, honestly, but that's pretty low. And then blue was at 2, which blue was the next player that I attacked. So after the hammering teal, so that that's probably sort of one of the reasons as well. Sometimes players don't really tech a lot. They focus on tier 1, but for sure, sticking him at 0 is really a big deal. Lumber harvested, he's at 1698. Actually, blue had less than that, but everybody else had way more than that. So that's not just the gold cost, but also the lumber. We were we had everybody over. I think everybody on our team was over. Well, yeah, everybody on our team was over 2,000, and then they had 2 players, which were both players that we harassed in the early game, or at least I harassed both of them in the early game, showing up under 2,000. So that's the impact. And again, in terms of the tech, it sort of floats all the way over to the tech. The gold and the lumber, and then the tech, sort of all correlated generally. And then if they don't get resources traded, I don't know if he got 300 lumber from somebody, or I assume that's gave. I assume the left side's gave, and then the right's sort of received. So, and I don't know if that number goes into this number. Probably not. So, but anyway, that would still put him, even with a 300, he would be two lumber under 2,000. So yeah, that's that's where it shows up. Pretty much. And then probably in units produced, they probably didn't produce. Actually, I guess, well, teal had a summon hero, so that's a little bit of a maybe misleading. And then, but blue was at 30 units. I guess he didn't do too bad. He was right there with like the other players. So that's sort of interesting. But Also, you should probably remember that a lot of those units are going to be workers being reproduced. So to replace the others. So in terms of largest army, if we look at that, that might be a little bit more sort of telling. And here we've got Teal at 25, so for sure he's going to be the lowest. And that also takes out the summoned units because they don't cost food either. So and then you've got Blue with 49. Blue wasn't really as he was actually ahead of several players. Actually, he was ahead of everybody but Orange and Purple at his highest point. Or me, I was Purple. So me and Orange ended up with the highest. I didn't go past 50, probably on purpose. But yeah, so Blue wasn't as obviously Blue wasn't as hindered by it as Teal was. He probably didn't. I don't know if he produced it, if he like rebuilt all of his lumber workers, because once you've teched and everything, he might have just been like, I'll just get a couple more, replace a couple of the lumber workers or whatever, and then it won't be that big of a deal. But Teal for sure. Teal needed a town portal. He wanted to get a bunch of towers, which he did. So that requires lumber. So he probably had to reproduce like all of his lumber workers. But anyway, that's sort of how you can see the strategy play out on the score screen. Obviously it's not always going to be that effective. You're not always going to get your allies, at least 2 other allies to join you with a Panda Rush. And they're not always going to do it correctly. The goal of the strategy, and I will often tell the other players doing the strategy that we need to be going strictly for workers. Like that's going to be the payday, the payoff of doing the strategy is if we can kill all the workers. They have the lowest. Generally, they have the lowest hit points of units we're going to attack. Their armor tends to be low as well until they militia, in which case they get like 4 base armor, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, if you get Breath of Fire doesn't account, it ignores armor, so armor's not going to help against Breath of Fire. And so yeah, if right off the bat 2 or 3 Breath of Fires hit those workers, they're probably going to be, if they hit the same workers, they're going to be in red hit points. So then 4 armor on 10-20% of your hit points is not as big of a deal as it would be otherwise. And then with another round of Breath of Fire coming, it really doesn't the armor really doesn't matter at that point, unless you're talking about actually attacking those militia. But again, like I said, if you're down to 10 or 20% hit points, that armor was not applied to the other 80% of your hit points, so it doesn't do a whole lot in that circumstance. And again, you just have to wait for another round of Breath of Fire, and that's going to be game over. So, generally, so yeah, that's the strategy. That was a really good example of it. It went well. The allies aimed their Breath of Fires well. They used them effectively. They didn't get immediately surrounded. The player that we attacked had an Archmage instead of a Mountain King. The Mountain King can sort of go for surrounds a little bit better. I mean, with Stormbolt, generally. So that can be sort of dangerous, but if you're trying to surround a Panda, but your units are just getting destroyed with Breath of Fire, it really doesn't. At the end of the day, it doesn't really make a big difference because you're still going to lose those workers. Maybe you get the Panda kill, 1 Panda kill, but getting 2 Panda kills is pretty difficult, even with a Mountain King by yourself. So, without losing, just massive amounts of workers. And again, two level 1 Pandas, if they are level 1, is going to be 340 gold. So in terms of how many peasants that requires, if you just look at the raw cost of the peasant, 2 peasants is going to be 150 gold. So, basically 5 peasants, is going to be is going to cover it. So all you got to do is basically kill 5 peasants, and then and that's not even accounting for the loss, gold mining and we're lumber harvesting. So So once you add that in there, you probably only have to kill like 4 peasants. And again, if you get 2 or 3 pandas, it's pretty easy to kill just 4 peasants. Like you're most likely going to be able to kill at least like 6. Probably if you got 3 pandas and even another hero harassing with those, you're probably looking at killing at least like 8 to 10 easily. If the players are actually breath of firing the peasants and not trying to hit like the hero or the footman or whatever, and not the peasants. So yeah, obviously I have to do the strategy, sort of that way, or really just creep. I mean, because the enemy's not going to have that many like level tier 1 units besides workers at that point. Like if they've got 2 footmen and an archmage, that's only 3 targets in terms of their army. So it's not really efficient to go for that. You'd probably be better off just to creep to level 2 and then go and try to find somebody to attack if you're going to go for their army, because that way you not only get Drunken Haze into the mix for everybody, but they will also have more targets, which again multiplies the effect of Breath of Fire to a certain extent. Again, there is a limit on the targets, but it's not. It's more than 3 as it goes. So anyway, that's the rundown of the strategy. Once you power level pandas, if you start getting to like level 5 and 6 with multiple pandas, that is pretty dangerous. You get a lot of synergy overlapping, which, I mean, one player can cast Drunken Haze, and then 3 other players can Breath of Fire, and then, the Drunken Haze applies to all of those if they're hitting the same targets, so, that are Drunken Haze. So you're getting that benefit over, multiple heroes, so it's pretty decent in terms of synergy. Now, you might have some redundancy if multiple players are trying to Drunken Haze, that it doesn't stack or anything, so you want to separate your Drunken Hazes if you're going to do that, which, the coverage isn't, the area coverage is not huge for Drunken Haze, so, if you want to hit their whole, like 80% of their army, everybody casting Drunken Haze, and then Breath of Fire, that's good. It's hard to coordinate, like you have to pay attention, and your allies have to pay attention, but if you're not like chatting about it, you might have some overlap in terms of redundancy on Drunken Haze targets, but if the players are paying attention, you probably won't have that much redundancy. You can sort of just take advantage of one Drunken Haze, everybody hitting it with Breath of Fire, and then repeating. And then the ultimate, the Panda ultimate is one of the top tier ones. So if you get to that level with your pandas, that can be very dangerous. Having all those like little pandas and everything. I would think these games generally, they're either boom or bust. That generally they don't. Most of the time, I don't see the games sort of lasting very long and getting up to that point. What generally happens is either it goes really well and the game ends in something like 12 to 15 minutes. So and if a players get a second hero, that sort of takes away from the experience, or the first hero, so you're not going to get level 6 as quick that way, or it goes really poorly and the game still lasts maybe about 15 minutes, but then it's harder for us to win. If we don't kill a bunch of workers on that attack and we lose our pandas and we weren't creeping or anything, well, the enemy sees what we're doing and we didn't do very well in the first push, and then they can just do their standard stuff, and then I would hesitate to say it's a sort of a huge disadvantage to just have pandas. Like, it's a pretty versatile and decent hero in general, but some players aren't used to just going for a panda first with every race or whatever, and it's they probably don't have as much experience doing it, and sometimes it doesn't synergize as well. Like with Undead, you like to have Unholy Aura for movement speed, and you like to have Death Coil for both single target focus fire, nuking damage, or healing. Either of those, you like to have the Death Knight for that. And if you have a panda, it spreads the damage. It's more of like, it's a little bit of a different play style. So it doesn't synergize sort of the same way as a Death Coil with undead units typically. And then you can run through the other races. You know, human likes to have brilliant sort of for casters if they go for that, and or like their second, third heroes if they go for that. Brilliant sword is effective. Also for creeping, you know, having a summoned unit, the water elemental is fairly useful. So, but the panda obviously lacks all that stuff. It's not a summon hero. You can creep okay if you use the spells. It's fine, but on most maps, but no brilliant sword there. So. And so yeah, that's, you know, how it goes. He doesn't have an aura, so he's not like, you know, a Tauren chieftain. You know, it's sort of similar to the panda. He lacks in some areas, but he has an aura that's really good. So you know, in other areas he's maybe a little better. It's like, would you rather have a debuff or an aura? You know, really just depends. If you got a big army, obviously endurance aura is probably good. If the enemy has a big army. Drunken Haste doesn't hit everything. It doesn't even hit as much as like Howl of Terror generally. So the coverage is small. So it doesn't scale quite as well with the army size. It scales more with like the DPS of the individual targets that it hits. So like on high level Blade Master stacked items, or on high level, you know, Demon Hunter, or you know, Frostworms, things like that. You know, it's a percentage reduction in chance to hit. So, you know, the more DPS something does, the more raw damage it's going to reduce. So that's just how it goes. Yeah, but that's going to be the end of this audio. You know, you can look at the hero levels. 2 for Teal's hero. Blue did fairly well. He sort of still kept up with the hero levels. He didn't get affected quite as much by the harass, for sure, but Teal definitely got hammered there, and that sort of showed up in sort of most of the metrics there. Unit kills, you know, if you don't have a big army, it's hard to get unit kills. Same with hero kills. I doubt he had any, actually. So yeah, that's, you know, that's the way the strategy goes. Again, panda time, or whatever you want to call it. You know, it's against human players, especially if a team has multiple human players. It can be fairly effective, I would say. You know, if you see a player getting a really, really early arcane tower, it's I guess you could still do it with like 3 or 4 pandas, but it's gonna be much easier for them to defend that. You know, and if you're facing this, you can try to separate your peasants, like maybe call to arms and separate the peasants as much as you can, so they're not hitting, like, you know, their max number of targets per shot, which I'm not sure what exactly that number is. It's probably like 6 or 8 or something, I would think. It's capped to, okay, it's capped to 8 targets. So yeah, the max, I guess, damage from level 1 Breath of Fire is going to be 65 initial damage times 8, which is going to be 460, I think, if you hit 8 targets. So that's pretty amazing. 460 damage for 70 mana is going to be pretty crazy. I'm sorry, no, that's wrong. I was off by about 70, so it's going to be, sorry, I messed up the math there. It's going to be 520, actually. So it's even more than that. Goodness. But anyway, yeah, that's going to be a lot of damage, though. So for level 1, now, again, you have to hit 8 targets, so that's sort of the caveat. But again, even if you're only hitting, like, you know, let's just say you just hit 4 targets, maybe more reasonable. You know, that's still going to be, you know, 260. So yeah, that's, you know, 260 damage for 70 mana is still really good. I mean, you know, you might say, well, yeah, AoE abilities, they do have that higher potential. It's like, sure, and a lot of AoE abilities cost more mana, though, like Frost Nova, Carrion Swarm, you know, they cost more than something like Death Coil. You know, Thunderclap even, 90 mana. You know, Shockwave, I think, is 100 mana. Phantom Knives, you know, Blizzard is a 75, but it's channeling, so, you know, it's a little easier to avoid that. You know, Flame Strike, again, it's channeling, but it's a quicker channel, but I think it costs 125 or 135 mana, so, you know, so yeah, you look at those numbers, and it's like they cost, you know, they either have a way higher mana cost, or they're channeling. You know, Rain of Fire, you know, Blizzard, Flame Strike. I think that's all the channeling. Cluster Rockets, if the damage isn't up there. Chain Lightning, I don't. That's the calculation's weird, but it's probably lower than Breath of Fire. Chain Lightning, but they did buff it, so it's, you know, maybe a little better. But anyway, that's the strength of Breath of Fire, and a lot of those, like Chain Lightning, does not hit buildings. So that, you know, if you've only got 4 units, but there's some buildings in the way, you know, Chain Lightning's not going to hit those. Breath of Fire would, Shockwave would, Blizzard would, Flame Strike. So Phantom Knives wouldn't. Doesn't hit buildings. Carrion Swarm doesn't hit buildings. Frost Nova, Impale doesn't. Cluster Rockets does, but I don't think it's nearly as good anyway as any of those. So yeah, you know, that's, you know, the other abilities seem to just have a downside that Breath of Fire just doesn't have. You know, Breath of Fire hits air, hits buildings, hits mechanical targets, low mana cost, non-channeling. It's on a hero with a ton of hit points. He's not a ranged hero. I guess that's one downside, but again, and the hero has a really great ultimate. You know, very versatile, one of the best ones in the game. You know, you look at the other ultimates. You've got like the Farseer. His is sort of meh. It's, you know, it's situational, channeling. The Archmage has a decent ultimate. It's sort of situational, but it's decent. But it's also channeling. The Dreadlord has a really strong ultimate, sure. The Blood Mage, really strong ultimate. The Pit Lord, pretty decent ultimate. Not as good as the Pandas, but decent. The Wardens is decent. So, the Tinkers is decent. So, you know, those heroes have decent ultimates. But then you start comparing it to other things, like the Death Knight. His ultimate's pretty bad. The Liches is sort of situational. It's a little bit better, maybe, than the Farseers. You know, you can hit units and heroes with it, too. So, but yeah, that's, you know, but I would put the Pandas like right up there in like the top 3 in terms of, well, at least top 5 in terms of ultimates. You know, you've got the Demon Hunters, you've got the Blood Mage, you've got the Dreadlord with Infernal. The Wardens is probably up there too. The Vengeance Avatar is pretty strong. I don't know if Charm's up there. Charm is very strong, but it can sort of be countered, like if you don't have a lot of big, strong units or something. But it's up there, so you know, it's hard to pick one, like which one's the best and everything. They're totally different. All these ultimates. So the Pit Lords is pretty good. I would put the Pandas above the Pit Lords for sure, though. But yeah, he might just be in the top 5, sort of in that sense. Avatar's pretty good. I think I'd still rather have the Pandas ultimate, but Avatar is a really good ultimate as well, for the Mountain King. But anyway, that's going to be the end of this audio. Pretty extensive, thorough sort of explanation of the strategy. I only had one replay here doing it recently. Because again, it requires your allies to cooperate. It requires your enemies to be a certain sort of race combination generally. You know, if it's just me going for a Panda, you just don't. I mean, it's still, you can still sort of threaten some stuff, but you've got to secure the kills, because if you don't, if I run in there and get like, you know, 2 peasant kills and everything else is in, you know, red, and then the allies, you know, my allies aren't with me, or, you know, they're not doing very well with the harass, and I don't get those kills, they just pop a regen scroll on their peasants if they're smart, and then they're back to full, and it's no big deal. So that's what your sort of the worry is. And again, it it happens much quicker when you have 2 or 3 pandas that you can kill targets. You show up and they don't have a lot of time to react. If you just got like one panda and an archmage or something like that, the enemy has not all day, but they have plenty of time to react in that instance. So you might get a mountain king come up from the side from one of their allies, a blade master, and then you can sort of run from a mountain king and maybe a blade master, but they are gonna, if you just try to run, you're probably either gonna take a ton of damage or actually get killed for sure. And that's sort of the choice. So are you losing a panda for something like 10 or more worker kills, or are you losing a panda for like 2 or 3 worker kills? It's a much different calculation. And again, it's much easier. It's not as micro intensive or sort of risky when all three 3 pandas or 2 pandas and other heroes or whatever show up. It's much easier to win that scenario than it is to sort of quote unquote get an advantage from that scenario than it is if you've just got one panda and one random other hero. Archmage, who's got Blizzard, okay, maybe, but there's a lot of heroes that don't really work well with this strategy. Maybe a Farseer with Spirit Wolves, if they're microing correctly. Demon Hunter, if their base is really open, maybe you can maybe get immolation. Even if you don't have immolation, the Demon Hunter dishes out damage at a decent rate, but it's not the same as Breath of Fire. The potential damage output for Breath of Fire on these workers, like I said, is 500 and 520 damage from hitting, if you hit the max number of targets with a single Breath of Fire. So you just multiply that by 2 or 3, and I mean you're just by 2 you're looking at over 1,000 damage. I mean, you spread out over 8 targets, of course, but that's it's you're gonna get, unless most of those targets are buildings, you're looking at a lot of damage. And if the buildings are towers, you can knock. That's the other part of it. Even if they have a tower going up, like upgrading, you throw those Breath of Fires down on the workers, like the gold mine workers, for example, and generally you're going to hit the tower as well. So it adds another target that is pretty important to destroy, and it actually can get destroyed by like 2 or 3 Breath of Fire. So yeah, that's that is the rundown of the strategy. I think it's fairly effective. It requires a little bit of cooperation in terms of hero choice and in terms of prioritizing targets, aka doing the strategy sort of optimally. I pointed out the reasons why it's not optimal to focus, like farms and footmen or something like that. It's much easier to get, and actually I'd say much more damaging to kill like all of his workers than to kill 2 footmen. It's like the experience is different, the economic impact is different, and so and in terms of the maximizing your damage is different. Going for footmen and hero versus peasants. If they just have 2 or 3 footmen, if they wanted to split those 2 footmen up, it is very easy to do that. But if they want to split their workers up, it is actually very difficult to do that in a short time frame. Generally, from where they, your gold workers or your wood workers, they're generally pretty clumped together, and there's really not a whole lot of room for them to run around, like all at the same time. It's not very easy to accomplish that in a short time frame. I mean, you can do it, and you probably should try to do it. It's just very difficult to pull off, execute it in the span of like 5 seconds when here are 3 pandas, especially if you don't see it coming. Which again, it's not exactly easy to see coming. If you just go straight from a tavern to a base, it's not generally like a very well scouted, you know, sort of path or whatever. So, but anyway, that's, you know, that's sort of a really getting really into the details there, the minute details of the strategy. You know, I don't have past that. I don't really have any like specific suggestions for different races. I think he works fine with fiends. I guess he works okay with ghouls. You know, really, you don't really need any specific unit types to work with the panda. Uh, you know, he doesn't have like a brilliance aura that only works with casters really, or vampiric aura that only. I mean, he doesn't have any of those auras that are restricted or anything like that. Uh, so yeah, he you know, he really depends on what the enemy is doing. If the enemy has mass magic immune units, that's when you get into trouble. And that's what you can maybe try to do to counter these types of heroes if you see them a lot. You know, destroyers, spellbreakers, fairy dragons, dryads. You know, these are sort of the risky things. Spirit walkers to a degree. They're not magic immune. Orc doesn't have anything that is totally magic immune, so that's why I say Orc is not exactly, you know, maybe the best race against this. But anyway, that's, you know, it can be risky to mass any of that stuff. You know, if you mass destroyers, they're not the most efficient unit in general. So while you might be able to counter their heroes, if they're massing tanks or, you know, maybe fiends or dryads or something, fairy dragons, if you just have mass destroyers, you're going to be at risk to that stuff for sure. Even flying machines to a degree, wind riders, hippogriffs, you know, all gargs, you know, all these things, even dragon hawks to a degree, going to be fairly dangerous for your army. And again, at 5 food, the cost effectiveness of destroyers are not amazing. If you're not against casters. If you're against casters, it changes the sort of dynamic a bit. But and then fairy dragons, similar deal. Most of the stuff that's good against destroyers is really good against fairy dragons also. With a slight difference with dryads, at least the fairy dragons can hit the dryads, whereas the destroyers can't hit them at all. And against like dragon hawks, they do piercing, which is slightly better against the light armor of the dragon hawks than magic damage. But they don't have dispel, so that's you know, they counter casters a little bit differently, but and they're only 2 food, so that's also probably more cost effective in the average situation. But but yeah, they're not like a hard counter to casters generally either. So well, I'll take it back. They're really strong against casters. Like they just don't dispel, or they don't have dispel. I should say that but they're really a really strong counter to casters because casters can't hit them, and aside from unless you say the Druid of the Claw, all the casters take extra damage being unarmored. They take extra from the fairy dragons, extra damage. So that's pretty good. And then obviously dryads are unarmored, so you know that things that are good against unarmored ground units going to be good against the dryads. So yeah, that's that's the rundown. And about the only sort of suggestion, sort of race specific suggestion, and that's against that's for the enemies. That's not for going for a panda. Everything else, you can just plug the panda in, and he more or less is going to be the same regardless of what units you've got. Now if you are doing a strategy that really relies on brilliance aura, obviously the panda is not going to get you there. As the first hero, not going to be as effective. You can add an archmage second, and sort of do that, but yeah, that's really all I can really say about the strategy. Past all that, I don't have map specific suggestions. If the tavern's close to one enemy, if it's close to a human enemy, that's generally really good. Certain maps, the tavern is not especially close to the opponents, but anyway, that's going to be the end of this audio. ScryMind signing out.